Okay, and now we go on to the design process. Design process is to give you a bird's eye view of what the design process is like from start to end, where economics part comes in, and how can you get started. From a very, very, very general perspective, okay, it's 3 steps. You've got the discovery phase, you've got the design phase, and the deploy phase. And in general, it's just these 3 big steps, but in reality, the design and deploy, it's an ongoing cycle. So it's kind of like agile systems where you design something, you deploy, test it out, come back, improve the design, go out, deploy, come back. And this is how it really works, should work, and will work. So this is a 3-step process where step 2 and 3 is just ongoing, non-stop. When we look at the discovery stage, what do we look at? We look at the different actors in the ecosystem. We look at the token business model, the value add of the network, the pain point, gain points. So this is just general discovery stage that just consultants do as well. So there are a lot of things that you can Google online to find out more about the discovery stage. But it's basically for you to understand more about your ecosystem. Do you need a token, or maybe you don't even need a token? Do you know who are the actors that you want to attract? Do you know what kind of value add that you can bring? If your network doesn't bring any value add, except for the fact that it has the word decentralized or blockchain in the title, then it's not really a value add system. It doesn't really add anything to the network. So discovery stage is very important to understand that in this process, it's worth diving into and worth designing economics model out of it, because it's adding value to the participants in the network. Then we look at the design process. So don't worry about if you don't know what these are, because in the next few videos, I'm going to go deeper into them. Okay. So we're looking at defining the design space. So like the participants, the problems, the solutions, the incentives, looking at the objectives and constraints. So every ecosystem has one main objective and then many other smaller objectives. So you want to really define that, as well as define the constraints. Because if you have no constraint, you can do everything under the sun. It's very important to have constraints. And then we are going to look at the economics of tokenization design. So we're going to look at market design, mechanism design, token design. And this is really the crux of the token economics that we're going to talk about. And I'm going to dive deeper into all of these in the next few videos. The concepts behind, the things to note, as well as the case studies and the use cases, so that you can start getting inspirations and implement it or start designing it. And lastly, is to really build them all together to get a token network fit. And lastly is deploy. In deployment stage, it's surveys, looking at surveys and theories, looking at behavioral experiments, because I told you behavioral experiments is very important. People are not rational, and we cannot assume that people are rational, because people are not rational. And if you assume that people are rational, but people are not, it's really going to mess up your system, and you might not get the outcome that you want. Then we can look at different simulations as well. So for some projects, it's really on a global scale. So they need to do more deployment and testings and run more simulations, but not every project needs that, as well as the different A/B testings. So for discovery stage, it's easy to find a lot of information online. For the design stage, it's something that I'll be talking to in the next few videos. And I want to just dive a little bit deeper into the deployment stage. The deployment stage is really important. I believe it's very, very important, because that's where how you can lie with statistics, how you can torture data until it produces something that you want. So I just want to dive a little bit deeper into that, just for one slide, so that you understand what's the common pitfall and how can you prevent that, to make sure that your deployment and your feedback is as accurate and as unbiased as it can be. So these are the common pitfalls in statistical analysis. The first one is bias sample. So you know how every toothbrush has this thing, like 9 out of 10 dentists recommend? What they do is that this marketing company called every dentist in an area and said, would you recommend XXX brand? And if the dentist said yes, they said, okay, one dentist approved, one dentist recommends, and they just keep repeating that. But it's biased because you're not giving the dentist an option of other toothpaste. And in general, you would recommend toothpaste because if you don't use toothpaste, then it's better to use toothpaste than no toothpaste. So it's a bias sample, or sometimes it's too small. You need so a good data is usually more than 30 people to get a good understanding, and sometimes sample size is only like 10 people, and that's not representative of the entire general population, right? Or you have bias averages. So there are three kind of average. You've got mean, median, and mean, medium, median, and so basically you have three types of averages, and mode. So you have three different averages, and sometimes they just use the term average where you're not really using the right term, or it's misleading. Discarded data that's not good for you, you just throw it away. A lot of people do that. I mean, sometimes it's good because 1 or 2 points might be probably the person answered wrongly, or they're just the wrong people to approach. But you can't discard data just because they don't fit into your model. Graph manipulation. I saw this at one of the conferences last year, and what they did is, usually you start your graph with a 0, and then you do your graph, right? But what they did was to really enlarge. They don't start it from 0; they started from a random number, and they have all the intervals to be very big. So now the graph looks like it's the variance or the changes in graph seems very crazy. But in actual fact, if you use a very normal axis starting from 0, the line is pretty straight. It's pretty safe and secure, or rather very stable. But they made it really large, so it seems like it's going up and down like crazy. So graph manipulation is something that you really got to consider. Semi-attached figure or false proxy. Sometimes you can't achieve. You can't prove A, so you would do B to prove A. So, for example, I can't prove that this is delicious, but I can use this to bake a cake, and if the cake is delicious, then it means that the chocolate is delicious. But it's not always true, because the chocolate is just chocolate, and the cake has a lot of other things. So this chocolate is 90% cocoa, and a cake you can add more sugar, more milk, and really change the taste and flavor. So saying that the cake is delicious because it uses this chocolate doesn't mean this chocolate is good, or it doesn't mean that everyone will like this chocolate. So it's a false proxy. And lastly, this is a huge thing. It's correlation versus causation. So correlation means when A happens and B happens, it doesn't mean that A happen means B happens. It just means that they happen to correlate and happen together. And causation is A happens, A causes B to happen, but it doesn't mean that B causes A to happen. So these are a lot of different statistical pitfalls, and this is how you can lie with statistics. One of the Nobel laureate economists, Ronald Coase, what he said was that if you torture data long enough, it will just agree to whatever you say. So these are ways to torture data, but please don't misuse them. I know sometimes when we do deployment stage, we really want to test if it fails or not, and sometimes you just have too much effort being invested into the project, and if it fails, then it's difficult to say that I have to restart. So that's why it's very important to do the stage where you design a bit and then deploy, test it out, come back, and then you keep doing that, so that you're not invested too much, and you can test if it succeeds or not. So that's something that I just wanted to quickly mention. Also, I want to mention this because I have not seen projects that are doing the deployment stage. Everyone is just designing and then ready to go. There are only 5 projects that I've heard that is doing a little bit more in the deployment stage. So it's something that you have to consider, and please do it if you're designing your ecosystem.